An outstanding nurse saved the life of a U.S. Marine in a desperate act that went against her hospital's rules. The price? She was fired without mercy. But 24 hours later, when everything seemed lost, an unexpected invitation from the president changed her life forever. It was a morning that seemed just like any other. The hospital woke up with the usual noise, the sound of metal stretchers rolling, the constant beeping of machines marking the patient's pulse, and the hurried voices of nurses and doctors rushing through the halls. For her, the main character of our story, that day felt like nothing special. She woke up early, drank her coffee quickly, and headed to work thinking it would be another long but normal shift. She had no idea that in just a few hours, her life would change forever. As she entered the hospital, she greeted her coworkers with a tired smile. She had been working there for months, and already knew every corner of the place, every smell of disinfectant, and every story hidden in the walls. Even though the environment could be heavy, she liked to feel that her work had a purpose: to help, to heal, to save lives. That was her true calling, and the reason she stayed strong even when exhaustion and stress overwhelmed her. The first part of the morning passed calmly. She reviewed charts, handed out medicine, and calmed a couple of nervous patients. She had learned how to keep her cool in the middle of chaos, to smile even when she was exhausted. For her, being a nurse was not just a job. It was a promise to every person who came seeking hope. The hallways breathed routine, the kind that gives a sense of safety. But in hospitals, routine can break in a single second. And that second came. From afar, she heard an unusual commotion. It wasn't the typical emergency call that sounded from time to time. It was different. It was mixed with shouts, fast footsteps, and a tension that filled the air. The nurse looked up and saw several people running toward the entrance. Her heart skipped a beat. She knew something big was happening. As she got closer, she saw two uniformed men, their faces tight with worry, carrying a wounded young man. He wasn't an ordinary patient. He wore a military uniform, and from the badges, he was a U.S. Marine. The hospital wasn't used to receiving soldiers on duty, and everyone was shocked. Blood stained his chest, and his lips barely managed to whisper words no one understood. The scene was overwhelming. Like everyone else, she hesitated for a second. But something deep inside her told her she had to act. She couldn't just stand and watch. With steady steps she moved forward, gently pushing aside those in the way, and took control of the situation. No one asked her, no one gave her permission, but she knew time was running out and that this man was about to lose his life. While the others hesitated, she moved quickly. With a clear voice she gave instructions. She asked for bandages, oxygen, and ordered a stretcher to be ready. Her experience guided her, even though she felt fear inside. Her hands shook a little, but she couldn't let it show. In that moment, duty was stronger than any doubt. What started as a normal day turned into a challenge that would test not only her medical skills, but also her courage. She didn't know it yet, but by choosing to step in at that exact moment, she had taken the first step toward an unexpected destiny. The usual silence of the room was broken by a desperate scream. "Help! He needs help now!" echoed at the hospital entrance. That cry wasn't normal, not like the usual calls in the halls. It was full of anguish, a call that bounced off every corner and made everyone freeze at once. Two soldiers rushed in, their faces marked by urgency. In their arms they carried a comrade who was barely breathing. His lips were purple, his uniform soaked in blood, and his chest rose and fell with great effort. The quiet murmurs turned into chaos. Nobody knew exactly what to do. The doctors on duty weren't nearby, and the nurses, shocked by the unexpected scene, hesitated between running for help or acting immediately. She, the nurse who only minutes before was living a normal morning, felt an impulse she couldn't ignore. Her heart was pounding, her palms sweaty, but her mind was clear. Right in front of her was a life fading with every second, and if she waited for instructions, it would be too late. The soldiers shouted orders in English, desperate, but few understood them. The confusion grew. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and raised her voice. With confidence, she ordered the area to be cleared, asked for a stretcher, and demanded the emergency kit. Her words broke the paralysis of the others. Some hesitated, but when they saw her so firm, they obeyed. The Marine was laid on an improvised stretcher. She placed her hands on his chest and immediately felt the seriousness of his condition. His pulse was weak, his breathing almost gone, and the bleeding out of control. She knew that in that instant, any mistake could mean the difference between life and death. The room filled with sharp sounds, scissors cutting the uniform, oxygen hissing from the tank, and hurried footsteps bringing what was needed. The Marine's face showed pain, but also fight. It was as if his body still refused to give up. With the experience she had built over years of service, the nurse began procedures that many would call risky. She knew she was breaking protocols, that she probably didn't have permission to do what she was doing. But what did bureaucracy matter when a human life was slipping away in front of her? The soldiers looked at her with a mix of hope and fear. It was clear they trusted her, even though they didn't know her. In those seconds, she carried not only the Marine's life in her hands, but also the heavy weight of everyone's silent plea for a miracle. Time seemed slower. Each second stretched endlessly. As she tried to stop the bleeding, she recalled all the time she had trained for moments of crisis, though nothing in her real life had ever been this intense. Her breathing synced with the patient's, as if with every exhale she was trying to lend him part of her own strength. For a brief moment, the thought crossed her mind. Stop. Wait for a doctor with more authority. But she erased it instantly. If she gave up, if she doubted, that man would have no chance. She made the hardest decision of her life, to take responsibility for whatever happened, even if it meant paying a price she couldn't yet imagine. Around her, chaos was deafening, but inside she felt a strange calm, a certainty that she was in the right place, at the right moment, and that she had to do the right thing, even if it meant facing painful consequences later. Amid the confusion, one of the soldiers briefly held her hand, as if thanking her for her courage. She looked at him for a second, but couldn't lose focus. She knew the battle wasn't won yet. The Marine was still in critical condition, and the true test was just beginning. That cry for help hadn't just broken the routine of the hospital. It had started a chain of events that would change her life forever. The Marine lay on the stretcher, pale, his eyes half closed, and his breathing weaker with every second. Blood kept pouring out, and every drop that fell felt like a clock marking the end. The soldiers who had brought him stood by his side, stiff, fists clenched, lips trembling. One of them whispered in English, almost like a prayer, while the other repeated over and over, "Hold on, brother, hold on." The nurse leaned over the wounded man and searched for his pulse. She could barely feel it. It was weak, irregular, like a rope about to snap. Her own heart raced, but she couldn't let fear take over. Her mind ran through every procedure she had learned, every training, every critical situation she had faced, though none compared to this. She asked for more gauze and pressed hard on the wound. Blood soaked her gloves and stained her uniform, but she didn't stop. "I need you to listen to me," she said firmly, raising her voice above the noise in the hallway. She ordered oxygen, secured the airway, and told someone to run for a defibrillator. No one questioned her. They obeyed as if she were the only one who knew what to do. The Marine coughed painfully, a thin line of blood trickling from his lips. The nurse felt a knot in her throat but hid it. She leaned closer, making sure the oxygen mask was tightly sealed over his face. "Breathe, just breathe," she whispered softly, as if her words could guide him back. In an instant, the pulse stopped. The line on the monitor went flat. A deadly silence filled the room. The soldiers' eyes widened in terror, and one of them shouted his name in desperation. Time itself seemed to freeze. The nurse didn't hesitate. She climbed partway onto the stretcher and began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3. She counted out loud as her whole body moved with strength and precision. "Come on, don't give up," she repeated again and again. Every push was an act of hope, an attempt to bring him back to life. Sweat ran down her forehead, her arms ached, but she refused to stop. The air in the room was heavy with tension. No one breathed. The soldiers watched her every movement, tears held back, knowing everything depended on her. Suddenly, the monitor gave a different sound, a faint beep that cut through the silence. The pulse was returning, weak, but there. She didn't stop. She continued for a few more seconds, reinforcing the circulation, until the vital signs slowly began to stabilize. The Marine's skin, once ghostly pale, started to show a bit of color again. His chest rose and fell with more strength. A collective sigh spread through the room. The soldiers looked at each other in disbelief. One of them, with tears in his eyes, whispered a shaky thank you. The nurse barely heard it. Inside, she felt relief but also immense exhaustion. She knew she had brought him back, at least for now. She leaned toward the patient, adjusted the mask, and secured the 4-line. "You're here, stay with me," she whispered, as if he could hear her from the edge between life and death. The young Marine opened his eyes just a little, a brief flicker, but enough to prove he was still fighting. The heroic act was complete. It hadn't been luck. It had been choice, courage, and the determination not to give up when everything seemed lost. The other medical staff arrived at that moment, alerted by the chaos, but what they found was a scene already decided. She had done what no one else dared, and thanks to her, the soldier had a second chance. For a moment, the nurse thought it would all end there, that life would return to routine and no one would remember what had happened. But deep in her heart, she knew this act would not go unnoticed. Something had changed, not only in the Marine's life, but in hers too. The news spread quickly through the halls. Doctors, nurses, and patients whispered about what had happened. A young nurse had saved the life of a U.S. Marine who arrived on the brink of death. Some spoke with admiration, others with disbelief. For a few hours, she became the center of everyone's attention. But while some whispered how brave, others murmured she broke protocols. And in a hospital, those words weigh more than gratitude. That same afternoon, still with trembling hands from the tension she had lived through, the nurse was called to the director's office. She thought she would be congratulated, or at least recognized. She imagined they would thank her for acting quickly, for not giving up, for doing the right thing. Instead, she walked into a cold room, with white walls and serious faces that showed no emotion. The hospital director, flanked by 2 administrators, looked at her with a distant expression. On the table lay a sealed envelope. The silence was so heavy she could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. "Please sit down," the director said, in a voice so neutral it sounded rehearsed. She sat, still holding on to a small spark of hope. The director took a breath and began reading a document. It spoke of procedures not followed, of unauthorized actions, of interventions outside her competence. Every word felt like a slap. He never mentioned the life she had saved. He never mentioned her courage. He only focused on the rules that, according to them, she had broken. Finally, with coldness, he closed the envelope and slid it across the table. "You are dismissed with immediate effect." The nurse felt her world stop. Her heart, which hours earlier had pounded fiercely to save a life, now ached like never before. Fired? For saving someone? She couldn't believe it. Her lips tried to form words, but all that came out was a feint. Why? The director avoided her eyes. "Rules are made to be followed. You acted without authorization. The hospital cannot take responsibility for what happened. She wanted to answer, to scream that if she hadn't acted, the Marine would be dead. She wanted to say there had been no time to ask for permission, that every second counted, that she had simply done what was right. But the words stayed trapped in her throat. She took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a formal letter, written with cold and empty phrases, as if it spoke of some routine paperwork and not the fate of a woman who had risked everything to save a stranger. She left the office with tears in her eyes. The hallway that earlier buzzed with whispers and stares now felt hostile. Some colleagues looked at her with pity, others turned away. No one said a word. Silence was the most painful answer. She walked to her locker, packed her things into a small bag, and took off the white coat that had meant so much to her. Every fold of that fabric carried memories. Endless shifts, sleepless nights, patients she had comforted, smiles she had brought out in the middle of pain. Now, all of it seemed erased in an instant. As she stepped outside, the afternoon air hit her face. She stopped on the sidewalk, breathed deeply, and let the tears fall freely. The injustice weighed heavier than the exhaustion. How could it be that instead of gratitude, she was punished? How could saving a life cost her her own, her calling, her livelihood? The walk home felt long, longer than usual. Each step was filled with questions without answers. In her mind, she replayed the Marine's face, fading away and then coming back to life. She had saved him, she knew it, and yet now, she felt like she had committed a crime. That night, sitting at the table in her small kitchen, she opened the dismissal letter once more. She read it carefully, searching for even one line that acknowledged her effort. There was nothing, only coldness. With a sigh, she set the letter down on the table. For the first time in a long time, she felt that everything she had built was falling apart. If this story has you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss a single episode. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Let's continue. The clock struck 10 at night when she finally collapsed onto the old armchair in her living room. She had walked for hours without direction, trying to clear her thoughts, but every street, every corner, brought her back to the same question. Why? Why had they punished her for doing the right thing? Why, after giving her all, had they treated her as if she had made an unforgivable mistake? The small house she lived in was wrapped in heavy silence. Only the hum of the fridge kept her company. She turned on a lamp and pulled the dismissal letter from her bag. She read it again slowly, as if by repeating those cold words she might find a hidden meaning, a secret explanation. But there was nothing. Every line seemed written by someone who had never been in that hospital room, who had never seen the Marine's pulse return, who had never felt what it means to hold someone's life in your hands. Tears began to fall before she could stop them. She covered her face with her hands and let out all she had held back at the hospital. The anger, the helplessness, the sadness. That night she was not just a nurse without a job. She was a broken woman who felt her calling. The only thing that kept her standing had been ripped away. Suddenly, her phone vibrated. It was her mother. She hesitated to answer. She didn't want to worry her, but at the same time, she needed to hear a familiar voice. At last she picked up. "Daughter, how are you?" her mother's warm voice asked. She stayed silent for a few seconds, trying to hold back her tears. "They fired me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was silence on the other end. Then her mother exclaimed in shock. "What? But you told me you saved a soldier." "I did, Mom. I saved his life. But they say I broke protocols, that I shouldn't have intervened." Her mother sighed. She could feel her daughter's pain even through the phone. Sometimes, doing the right thing comes with an unfair price. But you know in your heart you did the right thing. And No matter how much it hurts, no one can take away from you. The call was brief, but enough to remind her she wasn't completely alone. Still, when she hung up, the emptiness wrapped around her again. That night felt endless. She paced the living room, replaying every second of what had happened at the hospital. She remembered the Marine's face, the soldier's eyes, the moment the monitor beeped again. It was all burned into her memory like a film. And then the doubt hit her. Was it worth it? She sat on her bed, hugged a pillow, and let the silence keep her company. The ceiling became her only confidant as she thought about the future. What was she going to do now? How would she explain in another job interview that she had been fired for saving someone? Who would hire her after that? Fear began to grow. Fear of not finding another job. Fear of carrying an unjust stain on her record. Fear of losing everything she had built. The hospital hadn't only taken her position, it had stolen her security and her confidence. At midnight, she got up and went to the kitchen. She took a glass of water and looked at her reflection in the window. She didn't recognize herself. The woman she saw was tired, with swollen eyes and a broken soul. And yet, deep in her eyes, there was still a spark, a small light whispering, "You did the right thing." She clung to that thought like someone clinging to driftwood in the middle of the sea. Maybe she had lost her job. Maybe the world didn't understand what she had done. But she knew that young soldier was breathing because of her choice. And that certainty, even if it didn't fill the emptiness, gave her the strength to go on. The night dragged on slowly, as if the hours stretched just to make her suffer more. When she finally closed her eyes, near dawn, only one question remained in her mind. Will someone ever recognize what I did? The sun had just begun to filter through the window when she woke up, her eyes swollen from so much crying and her body heavy from lack of sleep. Exactly 24 hours had passed since that moment in the hospital. 24 hours since she saved the life of a Marine. 24 hours since she was fired for doing so. She got up slowly, feeling as if the world had turned gray. She turned on the coffee maker and stared at the steam rising, her mind drifting to her uncertain future. She had no answers, no plan, only a growing emptiness. Suddenly, a knock on the door broke the silence. 3 firm, sharp knocks, not like those of an ordinary neighbor. She froze, her heart racing. She hesitated to open. Who could be looking for her at this hour? She walked slowly to the door and peeked through the peephole. Outside stood a man in a dark suit, his expression serious, accompanied by another person holding a folder. They looked far too formal to be casual visitors. With some fear, she opened the door. The man handed her a thick white envelope, sealed with an embossed official crest. "Miss, we bring this for you. It is urgent," he said in a firm, almost solemn voice. He gave no further explanation, only waited for her to take it, bowed his head slightly in respect, and left with his companion. She closed the door slowly, the envelope trembling in her hands. The engraved seal shone under the sunlight pouring in through the window. She recognized it instantly. The presidential crest. Her breathing quickened. She stepped back and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope as if it were something strange, even dangerous. Why would she receive a letter with that seal? What could the presidency possibly want from her? Questions swirled in her mind. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the envelope wasn't meant for her. Or perhaps it was some sort of legal summons over what had happened at the hospital. The uncertainty pressed against her chest. She sat for several minutes, staring at the envelope, unable to open it. It was as if she knew that the moment she did, her life would change again. And she wasn't sure she was ready for more changes. Finally, with trembling hands, she broke the seal and pulled out the letter. The paper was thick, elegant, with the same crest at the top. She began to read, and her eyes widened in shock. The message was brief, direct, but powerful enough to take her breath away. The Presidency of the United States of America, on behalf of the President, extends an official invitation for you to present yourself tomorrow at the White House. Your presence is required immediately. The nurse dropped the letter on the table and held her head in her hands. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. She couldn't believe what she had just read. The images of the past 24 hours rushed through her mind. The cry in the hospital, the blood, the compressions, the relief of hearing the monitor, the cold dismissal letter, and now a presidential invitation. It all felt like a strange dream, a movie where she didn't understand her role. What could the president want from her? Why was she being called to the White House? Was it recognition, or were they planning to interrogate her about what had happened? Each possibility made her heart race. She jumped to her feet, pacing the room with the letter in her hand. She read the text again and again, searching for a clue, a word that might clear her doubts. There was nothing more, only that shocking invitation, as if it belonged to another world. For the first time in 2 days, her tears weren't of sadness but of confusion. She smiled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or cry. She knew her life would never be the same again. The envelope still lay on the table, open, yet she kept staring at it as if it were something impossible to understand. The morning light shone over the presidential seal printed on the paper, and every time her eyes returned to that image, a shiver ran down her spine. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a mistake. The letter clearly said that the President of the United States was requesting her presence at the White House. She placed a hand on her chest, trying to calm her breathing. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out. She stood up, paced back and forth in the kitchen, and sat down again, over and over, as if that letter had turned her home into a cage too small for her. The only thought in her mind was, why me? She could understand that the story of what happened had spread. Maybe the soldiers had told it. Maybe someone reported it. But all the way to the president's office? The idea was too big for her to grasp. She picked up the phone and called her mother. She wanted to share what she had just received, even though she feared it would sound so unbelievable that no one would believe her. "Mom," she said quietly, "I got a letter." "A letter?" her mother replied, confused. "It's from the White House. From the president. It says I must present myself tomorrow." There was a long silence on the other end. "Are you sure, daughter?" her mother finally asked, her voice a mix of surprise and doubt. "I'm reading it right now. It has the seal. It's official. Mom, the president wants to see me." Her mother's voice carried both excitement and worry. "This is bigger than you realize. You must go. But be careful. Not everyone gets something like this." She hung up and stayed quiet for a while. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "You must go, but be careful." She was right. She couldn't ignore a presidential invitation, but she also couldn't stop wondering what lay behind it. The rest of the day was a mix of anxiety and preparation. She opened her closet, checked her clothes over and over, unable to decide what to wear. Nothing seemed right for standing before the most powerful man in the country. In the end, she chose a simple, formal dress she had only worn on a few special occasions. As she folded it carefully, her mind drifted back to the moment the Marine opened his eyes on the stretcher. She remembered the exact instant life returned to him and realized that maybe, just maybe, that moment was the reason everything had changed. Perhaps the president wanted to thank her on behalf of his country. Perhaps this was recognition. The thought made her smile, even as it scared her. By the afternoon, she had read the letter at least 10 times. There were no extra details. It didn't say what would happen, only that she had to present herself at the White House at a specific time. Each reading deepened the mystery. As night fell, her nerves kept her from eating dinner. She walked through the living room, imagining possible scenarios in her head. Would there be a ceremony? Would the president want to meet her in private? Would there be press, cameras, speeches? Her heart swung between fear and hope. Before going to bed, she placed the letter on her nightstand, as if she needed to see it once more in the morning to confirm it hadn't been a dream. She lay down, closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, she didn't cry. This time, the feeling was different. She knew that morning would bring a new chapter, one she never could have imagined. Morning came faster than she imagined. She had barely slept a few hours, interrupted by the same thoughts over and over. What will happen when I get there? Why did they choose me? What if this is all a mistake? She got up before dawn. The dress she had laid out the night before hung from the back of the chair, a reminder that this day would be unlike any other. She dressed carefully, as if every fold of the fabric could give her a little confidence. In front of the mirror, she took a deep breath and tried to convince herself she was ready, though inside, insecurity consumed her. At the set time, a black car waited outside her home. It was no ordinary car. It was official, with tinted windows and a driver in a suit who spoke no more than 2 words. "Miss, we'll take you to your destination." She nodded in silence, clutching her bag tightly as she slid into the back seat. The ride began on familiar streets, but soon turned into a different route, more heavily guarded. Through the window, she saw how the neighborhoods changed, how the city itself seemed to transform as she approached the heart of power. Patrol cars on the corners, men with radios in hand, and a solemn atmosphere wrapped around her. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. The nurse tried to stay calm, but her mind would not stop. "What am I doing here? I'm just an ordinary woman, a fired worker who lost everything. I'm not someone important. What if the president realizes I don't deserve to stand before him?" That inner voice, the same one that had made her doubt herself so many times, grew louder with every kilometer. She thought of her former coworkers, the ones who barely looked at her when she was dismissed. What would they think now, if they saw her in this car on her way to the White House? Would they say she was lucky, or that she didn't deserve it? The car stopped at a checkpoint. Security officers checked documents, scanned the vehicle, and nodded respectfully at the driver. The strict, intimidating protocol made her swallow hard and grip the edge of her seat. Each barrier they passed felt like another door closing on her old life, and another step closer to an unknown destiny. Finally, the city faded away, and they approached a building she had seen all her life in photos and news reports. The White House. Majestic, imposing, surrounded by perfect gardens and visible security at every corner. The car stopped at a side entrance. An agent opened the door for her to step out. She descended with unsteady steps, feeling the weight of all the eyes on her. They checked her bag, passed her through a detector, and then, with a serious but respectful nod, one of the guards said, "Go ahead, they're expecting you." As she walked through marble hallways, portraits of presidents hanging on the walls, she couldn't help but think how unreal it all was. The nurse who yesterday had been unfairly fired was now crossing doors that so few in the world ever had the privilege to cross. Her doubts didn't vanish. That inner voice still whispered, "You don't belong here. This isn't for you." But at the same time, another voice, softer, deeper, reminded her of the truth. "You saved a life when no one else acted, and that's what brought you here." The journey ended in an elegant, silent waiting room. An assistant asked her to sit. She did, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the details of the room without really seeing them. Her heart pounded hard. Every minute felt eternal. She knew that, in just moments, she would be standing before the president. And although she didn't fully understand why she was there, she sensed that this meeting would not only answer her questions, but mark a before and after in her life. The air in the room was different, heavy, solemn, filled with history. The high ceilings, the shining chandeliers, and the portraits of past leaders seemed to watch her every step. She stood there, her heart racing, waiting for the moment when the main door would open. The presidential aide approached and, with a respectful gesture, indicated that it was time. She took a deep breath and followed, crossing a hallway that led to an even more imposing space, the Oval Office, the room where so many decisions had changed the course of the world. And there he was, President Donald Trump, standing by his desk, looking directly at her. His presence commanded respect. She felt her legs tremble, but she held her gaze steady, aware that she was in the center of a unique moment. Trump stepped forward and extended his hand. "You are the nurse everyone has been talking about," he said in a deep, clear voice. She could barely nod as she shook his hand. Her skin tingled at the thought that the most powerful man in the country was greeting her with respect. The president led her a few steps closer. "I've read your story," he continued. "I know what you did. I know you saved the life of one of our Marines when no one else acted. And I also know that instead of recognition, what you received was an unjust dismissal." The words struck her heart. She hadn't expected him to know so many details. She hadn't expected anyone, much less him, to acknowledge the injustice. "In this country," Trump went on, "we value those who have the courage to do what is right, even when others freeze. You showed bravery, commitment, and compassion. That is what makes our people great." She felt tears welling up but forced herself to hold them back. Then the president picked up a document from his desk and held it up before her. "That is why, on behalf of this nation, I want to present you with an official recognition for your heroism. And more than that, I want to offer you a new path." The room, silent, seemed to grow heavier with anticipation. Trump continued, "As of today, if you accept, you will join a national program for veteran care. There, you will be able to use your vocation and your skills to help those who have served our country. You will not be ignored again. No one will ever say your effort has no value." The tears finally rolled down her cheeks. She could barely reply, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Mr. President." Trump nodded and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You did what many did not dare to do. Your story does not end with a dismissal. It begins today with a greater future." A few official photographers captured the moment, but for her, more than the cameras, more than the solemnity of the act, what stayed with her was the certainty that someone had finally recognized her truth. She was no longer the fired nurse. She was now the woman who, with her own hands, gave life back to a Marine, and who had been called by the president himself to hear those words. When she left the Oval Office, the air felt different. The weight she had carried for days seemed to vanish. She had found justice, and even more, a new purpose. Her life had changed forever. What began as a routine in an ordinary hospital had ended with an invitation that took her to the very center of power. And there, before the president, her heroic act received the recognition it had always deserved. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time!